Is the okay? Hold on. All right, and we're live. Hey, my apologies to everybody out there in live stream land. We're clicking on some buttons, and for some reason, it wasn't going live. But anyways, there we go. We're now live. Welcome,
I think there was
everybody.
some shadow IT at play here.
Damn, it's Antoine as the shadow IT stuff causing us this problem. Let's blame it on Antoine. Well, our special guest today, our topic today, of course, is shadow IT. We're just coming out of October, which was Cybersecurity Month. And of course, it should be Cybersecurity Month and day every day. But hey, it should be cybersecurity something going on. Hey, welcome, Neil. We just joined the conversation. All right, so our guest today is Antoine. He's from a company called Jump Cloud, and I'm hearing an echo from you there, Neil. All right. I'll let Neil sign out and sign back in. All right. So shadow IT is a topic. There's a lot of problems out there. As we get the technical issues off, let's blame it on shadow IT again. Antoine, welcome. How are you?
I'm good. How are you? Thank you for having me.
It's my pleasure. Randall, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. I really enjoyed that event we just did in Lancaster. Lancaster?
Yeah.
Hope I said it right.
Lancaster, not Lancaster. Lancaster.
Yeah. What's nice is we have to put the focus on LAN, which,
LAN.
for tech guys is easy.
Yeah, there you go. So yeah, we were just coming out of our IOTA cybersecurity event last week. So we're up to our eyeballs in cybersecurity stuff. And what else can we do with Master Chat? Add more, double down on cybersecurity. Today we're going to talk a little bit about something a little bit different, in the shadow IT space. And we invited Antoine to join us because he's an expert in this area. I'm going to bring Neil in again, and hopefully his microphone and everything is set up okay. Neil, how's it going?
Well, you sound back to me. How am I sounding?
You're sounding perfectly as usual.
I always open it in the wrong browser. When will I learn? When will I learn?
When will you learn? This is now like 5 times. I'm not sure. All right. So Antoine is our guest, Neil, and he's an expert in this shadow IT world. And of course, he's done some stuff. So Antoine, give us a bit of a background on your company and where you got started from and how you got into Jump Cloud.
So I started a company called MyKey. We used to do password management and browser security for MSPs and their customers. And a year ago, I started having conversations with Raj and Greg, the founders of Jump Cloud, and they shared with me the bold vision they have for the MSP space and how they see Jump Cloud being a core player in that space. And we were about to raise our next round of funding, and things led to other things. And finally, we decided to sell the business to Jump Cloud. And I joined as a co-founder in Jump Cloud and a GM of our MSP products. So that's how I got there. Now, Jump Cloud does identity, access, and device management for direct customers, but also MSPs and their customers. We centralize these capabilities in one platform that they can use to deploy and manage identities, access, and devices at scale.
So, Antoine, before we jump into the technical stuff, people are definitely wondering, where do you get that set of hair from, man? Jeez.
That's a comment that I get very frequently. It's everyone in my family, actually. From my dad's side, everyone looks like this. On my mother's side, everyone's bald. So it was a 50-50 chance I got my dad's side.
Well, bottle that and sell that. Anyways, good stuff. Looking great. Well, now we got that out of the way. Define shadow IT for us, Antoine.
So shadow IT is the use of IT systems, devices, softwares, applications, and services without the explicit IT department approval. So for example, if you want to share a file with another user in another company or one of your customers, and you're trying to share it by email, and you're hitting an 8 megabyte limit on the attachment there, you go create a Dropbox account without anyone knowing. You put the file in there and share it with the customer. That's an instance of shadow IT. You just drop the Dropbox into your company's environment without their knowledge.
So how big is this problem? How pervasive is it in the community? Like, is everybody doing it, or just a few people?
I mean, we all know that we do it, right? So if we want to pay, if we want some numbers, McAfee did the survey at one point, and they found out that 80% of employees admit to using SaaS applications without IT approval. So it's at least 80% of people that do it. But I mean, I think all of us here know that we've all done it at some point.
So it proves that 20% is lying.
Yeah, 100%.
True.
Well, shadow IT, I mean, in reality, great definition. So cybersecurity is obviously a big problem everywhere, and we just spent a month talking about it. We just came out of an event talking deep on it, on the topic. And why does shadow IT matter, right? What's the problem, Antoine, with shadow IT? First of all, Randall, Neil, do you want to chime in there about shadow IT? Are you guys abusing the system?
Oh, absolutely. I'm from a sales background, so any way we could circumvent the system or get a shortcut or a hack, we would find it. And obviously, as Anton was saying, with the way technology works now, employees are more tech savvy, and they're not, they're used to downloading apps onto their phone whenever they want anything. So it doesn't surprise me that that's happening. But I must admit, prior to us talking about it tonight, it's not something which I'd thought about much in that commercial sense. So it's a great topic to have brought up.
Randall, what's your take on it?
I think what's really hard is for the businesses that don't really address this issue. It becomes this weak link in their security, a weak link in their processes, and we even see companies, buying, seeing a laptop, for example, at Best Buy or Office Depot for, a couple $100 less than what they would normally pay for. And they go for it because thinking they're going to save money. And then they realize, well, it's Office Home. I can't join the domain. It's an i3 instead of an i5. It might not last as long. We see bad decisions basically sometimes if they don't really have a good trust with the company that provides services for them or their own IT department. So it's definitely a problem, and we're seeing people bringing in different devices without being really tested and approved, and it just causes problems and chaos sometimes.
So I just heard that about 50% of all IT apps being used are unsanctioned. Is that true, roughly?
It sounds right.
So that's not good news. So let's dig into the apps itself, right? So you've got these apps that people are using, and what is the problem with the apps itself? How does that get attacked by hackers? How do they get in there if I'm using a rogue app?
It doesn't need to necessarily get attacked by a hacker, but that's a possibility, right, with certain apps. The real problem is that it can lead to data loss. It can lead to data breaches. It can lead to losing compliance. It can lead to duplication and additional costs within your businesses. If we are to double click on one of them, for example, data loss, let's say you're putting sensitive customer information in that Dropbox account that you just created, you just ship it and you leave the company. You have a loose Dropbox account now that's out there where the password that might be shared in a password manager that you're using within the business that has sensitive client information on it. The same could happen with a SurveyMonkey, for example, that you run without approval from the IT team, where you ask customers for sensitive information. Data breaches is the second point, right? And that touches back on the way hackers could find vulnerabilities and exploit things. So if you're using things without your IT team's knowledge, it's possible that these things aren't to the standard, the security standard that your team expects you to use. So they could have vulnerabilities in them. They could be not audited. You could be using weak or reused credentials to access these services, and that can lead to data breaches. And these are the kinds of data breaches where your company doesn't know the source of. So they see customer information being leaked on the internet and you making the news online, but you don't know where this breach is coming from. You're looking at your system, your intrusion detection systems aren't showing anything. There isn't any sign of a compromise when it's actually an employee in one of your remote offices somewhere that put sensitive information on an unsanctioned SaaS platform that was compromised, but because he was using the same password that he's using on his Instagram account, for example, which is test1234567.
Well, I mean, that would be bad news. But I mean, some of these platforms like Dropbox, and so on, they've got pretty high standards of security, right? It's a very big brand, And so, a person would say, like, why not use it, right? From a security perspective. But it's really not just a security perspective. It's like the data is now out there floating around in space, right? And then
Yep.
someone has access to that Dropbox so that can pull in that data, and then whatever they do with that data, and then so on and so forth, right? Is that the point, that we want to keep the data contained, and so we know where the data is or going at any time?
That's one aspect of it. You also, if you're compliant with different standards, there are processes that you follow. You have to list the different services that you're using, how you're using them, how they fall within the scope of your IT strategy. And having things that are unsanctioned or that are being used can break your compliance, because there's a discrepancy between what you're reporting and reality now. That can be another big problem for a lot of organizations as well. But I mean, shadow IT isn't done maliciously most of the time, right? Employees are trying to find the most productive ways to get things done. This is the main reason why shadow IT exists today. And it leads to IT, it can lead to IT to write innovation within your IT. So it's important to keep it. You shouldn't try to suppress it completely. What you should try to do is just manage it and make sure that it's happening within a framework that you have set up that minimizes the downside of shadow IT.
Makes sense. Randall and Neil, how do you guys, obviously using different apps, right? How do you know if it's sanctioned? Like, how do you know if it's a good app, bad app? Like, what do? Do you Google? Like, how do you know?
Well, I think that, Julian, that's kind of that catch-22 scenario, isn't it? Because you can see an app, and it's not the app itself which is the problem, but it's the way that people then choose to use it. So I think that's the key thing for me. Is it's I think Anton was talking about again, which actually don't stifle, but actually maybe what we need to think of, how do you build a pipeline within your organisation? That's when someone discovers an app, they're actively encouraged to share it back up to the IT team. So that, for me, always thinks back into it, which comes up in most of our master chats, which is making sure we have that kind of true 365 review of our business processes and truly engage with everybody. Because I guess the playing devil's advocate, if I've got a really good forward-looking IT team and I take them a new idea and I know they're going to run with it, I'm going to have that dialogue. If, on the other hand, there's a bit of software which, from my perspective, making my life misery, and I find a hack and a workaround on my phone, and I know if I mention to my boss, you say I can't use it, I'm just going to shut up. Because, the bottom line is, people remain people, don't they?
Randall?
Well, first of all, I'm a little disappointed that Antoine shared my password to everybody on the internet. Password 12345. So I guess I'm gonna have to change that as soon as possible. But I see it as a problem too with hardware. I've seen instances where somebody brought a little dumb 4-port switch to just so they could have more ports in their office, and lo and behold, they kind of create a loop back and take the whole network down just out of a fluke, just plugging one wire back into the same port, the same device, and little things like that could really be damaging. But I think Neil hit the nail on the head when talking about communication. If you have a company that has open communication, that they clearly explain that what are the processes, if you want to use an app, maybe to bring it to our attention, and as an IT team, whether it's internal or an external team, to listen and to try to find a way to make things work, to make those clients or to make the users able to do their work in a better way, and maybe things that they prefer, more power to them. Like if it can be a win-win if it's possible, but if there is a real danger, then it should be discussed and maybe at that point blocked.
I think the thing there as well, which I think about, is if you've got, I have my little app on my phone, it will help me circumvent the process, makes me more efficient. If you don't communicate that, it's not just the dangers which we're talking about in terms of the the potential loss or leakage of data, but there's also the fact that it may make me efficient, but it may make my team less so. So I think what we've got to recognise is that there's not only the potential risk of big ticket items, but there's also that fact that actually I can see a situation where everybody's saying, here's my job description, and reinventing with their own mini tool set means everybody's working differently. And suddenly some of those benefits we're used to in at larger teams are just going to be just buried under, because, one person leaves. What did Neil used to do? I've got no idea, because it's all on this smart device. All these things are things which maybe have been accelerated by the fact that, hey, there's loads of people now working remotely from home all around the planet. What do we do about it?
So first big takeaway we've got here now. So if I was a company or the IT department in a company, I'd really make it very open and welcoming to the employees to say, look, we know you're using different apps. Don't hide it, right? Let us know what you're doing, and let's see if we can pull this within our, our security parameters, if you will, or give you a better solution, or tell you how we can make this work, right? So don't hide. I think is the first takeaway. Don't keep it a secret because it could come back to bite you, the company, especially now when we're talking compliance, privacy issues, and so on. And companies, employees do some crazy things sometimes. They take a USB and they download a whole bunch of data to take it home to work and bring it back to the office next day and look great. It's not that they want to steal information; is they're just taking the path of least resistance. Um, and as I was told, zero trust means deny, 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 right? So if you start getting all that denial, at some point you go, what's the point, right? And you find ways to circumvent. So that would be the first takeaway, to have an open discussion with your company about a policy there.
I think
Um,
also when
sure.
we're now into that era of work from home, it brings a whole other level of complexity. We might have a secure laptop behind an unsecure home router that has been updated in 10 years, and it's got a weak password. So there's so many factors, especially in the work from home environment, where you really have to address those issues, because those become, again, those weak links in your security profile.
And you've touched on the first phase, right, of mitigating shadow IT, which is the most important, arguably, and it's discovery. Like, how do you actually continuously discover new shadow IT instances so you can take action? And having that open stream of communication and like a procedure for humans to report their usage of third-party solution is an important component. But let's say you're an MSP and you're managing 150 companies. How do you scale that, right? You're going to need to have some software assistance there to give you some of the visibility to have these conversations with your customers. And this is where different vendors that can help in that space come in.
So I guess a way to discover is you use your app, right? You plug it in, you launch it, and then it comes back and it does some spider crawling, quote unquote, and it comes back and says, "Hey, you've got a billion apps being used out there for your employees," and it kind of maps it to each person or to each device. Is that
So
about right?
yeah, our platform is not directly a shadow IT detection platform. We do identity access and device management. But because shadow IT spans from identity to devices, and we do both identity access and devices at the same time, we're able to get that visibility. So you have a jump cloud agent that deploy on the endpoints of users who manage their devices. An agent can be used to push policies on the device, it can be used to run commands, it can be used to get you a snapshot of telemetry of the machine. So you can use it to some extent as an RMM to do a lot of the monitoring and management of that device. And part of that allows you to discover installed software on the machine. And you can actually check to see what types of applications users are using across your organization and detect instances of shadow IT. So on the identity side for cloud-based stuff, we have a password manager, for example. And that password manager allows you to manage passwords across the organization and shares them securely and get everything in an auditable and clean way. That also allows you to detect instances where users have signed up to accounts that are not sanctioned by your organization. So you're actually blending the device side, which is the installed softwares on a device, and the identity side, which is SaaS apps and services that employees are using, into a singular view that allows you to discover instances of shadow IT. Now, is it 100% foolproof? Of course not. You're always going to find, employees always find a way to innovate in a way that's very difficult to detect. So what you do there, so for example, you buy a laptop, for example, that you see at Best Buy, start using the laptop doesn't have the jump cloud agent on it, for example. There's no visibility into what's happening there. So the way you limit that type of action is by enforcing things like zero trust, like conditional access policies to access different types of applications, using single sign-on, so you're requiring authentication into an identity provider, and using things like a password manager that can only be installed on sanctioned devices. In that case, I go to Best Buy, buy that laptop, and I try to access any of the applications that I need to work, like Slack, for example. And you discover that you can't because there's a conditional access policy that requires that the device has an agent installed on it and gives you, for example, a link to download that agent. As soon as you download it, the IT team discovers there's a new device that was previously not there before. And that prompts the conversation. And I've done it myself. So when I joined JumpCloud, I had my own device that had WhatsApp installed on it. So it didn't actually have it installed. I had my own device. It had the JumpCloud agent installed, and I downloaded WhatsApp to talk to my family. So as soon as I downloaded WhatsApp, I received a Slack message from a person on our IT team saying, "Hey, did you install WhatsApp on your device?" And I was like, "Yeah." And they told me basically WhatsApp is something that's not sanctioned. You're going to unfortunately have to remove it from the device. The alternative is to use web.whatsapp.com, which is the web-based alternative to WhatsApp. So not only were they able to detect and ask me to delete WhatsApp from my machine, but they also gave me an alternative to not actually get in the way of me doing my thing. And that was, I felt, the right way to handle the situation. If they had tried to find a way to block it completely, I would have found a way to get back to it. Like I have a device that was shipped to me by JumpCloud, an iPad. I'm not sure it's managed yet. I would have installed WhatsApp on it. So and these types of decisions are made every day by people in organizations, not because they're malicious, but because they want to get stuff done, and they want to get stuff done without anything getting in their way. So it's about detecting, classifying, mitigating, and often giving them an alternative. And you're going to find very frequently that an app that you discover might be something okay for your company to use. In that case, you just put a green check next to it and say, okay, from now on, this is a sanctioned application that we're going to allow others to use. And that's where innovation leads to standardization within the business.
Sneaky way to figure it out. Quite interesting. You know, I mean, at the end of the day, right? There's also another clash of problems, right? So, and you actually pointed out, right? So let's say I want to use an application to talk to my friends and family or whatever, right? But I got one computer, right? So do I have to have one business computer and I have one personal computer now? I mean, is that where we're going? We have to have it completely separate, or is there a way to kind of like put it in a sandbox so it doesn't go into the actual business world? How can you have an unsanctioned app, right, running on the same device as your business? Is it possible?
On Android, for example, it's possible, right? Because Android containerizes the
Okay.
personal stuff and the enterprise stuff. So you can download your personal apps and stuff in your personal vault and have the enterprise side separate. I don't know how you do that on Mac and Windows. Maybe there's a solution, but I haven't encountered. You could maybe have different users, but I mean, if the machine was shipped to you by your company, there's the assumption that this is a company issued device and that you shouldn't put personal stuff on it. So I would say that most people wouldn't even feel comfortable putting their personal pictures, accounts, and stuff on their company devices. Now, a lot of us don't care, right? I'll log into my Facebook account and Instagram account on my computer, and I'll use it the way I use my personal device. This is where the company needs to come in and say, okay, this is the amount of risk that we're accepting to take. Is this within that threshold of risk, or do we need to actually take action and prevent users from doing things? And in the case they do prevent users from installing their personal stuff, then you might need to have different devices for personal stuff versus work stuff.
You have like five computers. Neil, you wanted to say something, or Randall?
I had a question for
Sure.
Antoine. Maybe what is the low hanging fruit in terms of what is the most dangerous thing you've been seeing when it comes to shadow IT? The one thing that people should be really looking out for in terms of something simple to spot that's really dangerous.
Is if you have the right infrastructure, it's very easy to spot a lot of things, right? So you can spot the applications installed, you can spot services that they're using. For me, the most dangerous thing is always going to be malicious applications, software that they're installing, and third-party services that they're using with compromised credentials. This just like keeps me up at night. Like having sensitive company information on servers that you're not 100% aware of, where the password is really weak and there's no MFA on the account. Like that's a bad situation. Like you can really do some damage to your business if you're doing these types of things.
Are there specific apps as well that you want to call out? Like you said that WhatsApp is one of those things that's kind of unusual. but there's a version that you can go web based. Is that an app problem?
So WhatsApp in itself is not a problem, but it's just the company policy. So in part of the phases, it's discovery, classification, and then remediation. When we discovered WhatsApp at some point in the past, we got to classification, and there was a decision that was made that was WhatsApp was not okay to have on the device for one reason or another. I'm not aware of the reason. I'm not saying WhatsApp is insecure. I'm just saying that within the system put in place within my specific organization, WhatsApp is not an allowed application. In terms of like specific applications that I'd like to call out, there aren't any that come to mind, but users tend to download insecure things. So you could be taken to a website that's a phishing website that looks like the real Dropbox website that's prompting you to download Dropbox for Mac. And you download Dropbox for Mac, and it's not actually Dropbox for Mac. It's a malicious version of Dropbox for Mac created by this malicious party. That would be really bad. And it's very difficult for a lot of users to spot these things in general, because the context that you come from a lot of the times is an okay context. You get an email that seems okay from a person that you know, takes you to a website where you try to sign up doesn't work. And then the website says, hey, sign up's not working, try to install an application on your computer. All looks normal, right? And you're so far down the tunnel at this point that you don't know that you might be getting tricked by someone at that point.
Yeah, good reason why you want to have the IT departments involved. Look, I want to double click on one other aspect of the apps itself, right? A lot of apps are built of open source code, and a lot of open source code are sourced openly on the internet. And developers, you just grab code from here, there, and everywhere, and they plug it in, usually from sources that they know is good, right? But I'm not quite sure of the number, but the biggest chunk, like maybe even 80% of all the apps out there, has open source code somewhere in it, right? If not 100%, right? And what that means is that if you're using an app where the developer has pulled down some code from the internet, open source, that is actually built with vulnerabilities or built purposely to infiltrate organizations, and that is in your code. There's no way you as a user will know that. Quite honestly, it's no way as an IT person will know that. So this is a really big danger of when you're bringing unsanctioned apps into your environment. And I know many, many, many stories about apps that has been infiltrated, and how people get in through apps into the access of your whole data. So it's not a matter of like, hey, I've got an app, it's a workaround, helps me do this, and even the data loss. It is an actual vulnerability that hackers can exploit to get into a system. Are you seeing that as well, Antoine?
Yes, I mean, that's very common, right? So all developers or most developers use open source code, and you have vulnerabilities in these dependencies, vulnerabilities that are available, exist on day one, the day you implement the code, but are not aware of, and vulnerabilities that show up over time. So it's safe to assume that the longer you keep an application using third-party dependencies unpatched, the more vulnerabilities are going to get discovered in these dependencies, the more risk you're exposing your users to. And that's a very difficult problem to solve, right? We now have tools that allow you to scan open source repositories and point out vulnerabilities. They're also able to alert you when there's a new vulnerability discovered in the code that you're using. But it's very common also for it to take time for you to make the changes necessary to your code to patch it to the latest version, because sometimes dependencies have their own dependencies. And a patch was released for that dependency, but it's incompatible with that dependency that still hasn't been updated, and you have to wait, or you have to come up with your own workaround. So it's also like it's even when you're aware of a problem existing in your dependency, it's very frequent for you not to be able to patch it overnight. So it's always a balance. You need to look at the risk, figure out what you need to do based on what you're seeing. And some companies do it very well, and they issue patches, and then it's the responsibility of the business or the IT team of that business to patch these applications to keep you up to date. But a lot of the time as well, they find these vulnerabilities and they're not able to patch them and don't communicate well, or they don't find these vulnerabilities because they don't have the right processes in place, and they keep software unpatched that's known to have vulnerabilities in it. And then it's a game for hackers to try to figure out which applications are using which dependencies that they found a flaw in, and that leads to compromise. We see this every day. That's the reality we live in.
What a rabbit hole we're living in. You go into one, as another problem pops up. Um, Neil, when you look at apps that you run, right? I mean, are you thinking about the cybersecurity risks at all? And how do you know what you don't know?
Well, I think it's that blending, isn't it, between your business life and your personal life. So I would say, coming from a programming background, I'm always very suspicious of any software in the business space. I think the danger which we have, which has basically evolved over the last decade or so, is that in the old days, computers used to fall over a lot. They would go wrong. You need to know what you're doing to get them working again. Whereas now we all want that kind of Apple experience where we just click and it works. And I think that creates a false sense of confidence. Because on the development cycle, so look at the code that we develop in house. The way that we would do that is, and we build on Ruby, use the Ruby on Rails framework, and it's a very robust community. So we know that the components we may use are regularly maintained, but we still write a full test suite for that product. So I guess one thing you could say to people is maybe when they're looking at that, look for the vendor. Who is it? Who's publishing this bit of software? If it's one Batman in his basement, the chances are that that's going to be more of a security risk than if it's somebody who's got a complete suite of applications which have got pedigree in the marketplace. So a little bit more due diligence on what you installed is probably worth having. But I think the problem is at the moment, I'd say that I'd be as good as everybody else. If it's in the App Store, whether it's on Android or Apple, if I like the look of it, I'll download it and I'll try it. If I don't like it, I'll uninstall it. But if it's malicious, that could already be too late.
Is it still true, Antoine? Is a great point. Is it still true, Antoine, that Android apps are a little bit more vulnerable than Mac apps? Is that still the case, or is that a myth?
That's the impression that we have, right? We feel like Android apps are less secure than iOS apps, mostly because iOS still has more stringent controls, but we still find instances where there are iOS apps that are malicious and are being distributed at scale to users. But Android makes the news more frequently. The takeaway here is that, like, regardless of the store where you're downloading an app, there's always the possibility that this app is malicious. It could be malicious in itself and try to take over your device. It could also offer to do something but take more data than it's asking for, and then use that data to do things, or like attack you in different types of ways, or sell it like to different parties. So, like, no source is safe today. You just have to use your best judgment, and as Neil said, looking at the vendor, trying to understand what their processes are is the most important thing. At a personal level, you might not do it, so you'll just use popular apps, and then there's the assumption that if something bad happens, it's going to happen to millions of users, not just me. That somehow, I don't know why, makes it a bit better for a lot of people. But within an organization, I think that you should do your own due diligence and try to pick vendors that are known to follow best practices.
It reminds me of that time where Sony put in a rootkit on a CD for copy protection. It's a long time ago, but unknowingly, they basically infected a bunch of computers with rootkits just to try to protect their IP. And that's a big company. That was one of the major companies. So you never know, and that's why it's important to have some sort of control. And I'm assuming, I'm assuming Jump Cloud is kind of like that flashlight that uncovers the dark IT. If I can give you a marketing little slogan there.
Yeah, thank you.
Searchlight for IT. Yeah, we'll just take a small royalty, right? Yeah. I want to throw a little bit of gasoline on this a little bit, because even if you lock down the software, even if you do the unsanctioned stuff, there's another layer in there that I've been talking to some cybersecurity experts on, is the API thing. So all apps, like 73% of all internet traffic apparently is API to API type thing. And so, yeah, you may have a really cool app that's perfectly awesome, perfectly secure, but it's using APIs to connect to other apps where the vulnerability can leak, right? Can have a problem. What's your take on APIs, Antoine? Should we forget about that, or should we think about it?
APIs are essential to the way we do things today, right? So I don't think we're gonna stop using APIs anytime soon. But with APIs, there's a lot of risk around the keys or the authentication layer, how you authenticate these APIs, the keys that you might be using, how well you're safeguarding them, how frequently you're rotating them, who has access to them. There's like this key management layer that's very important. There's also the same due diligence that you need to do on the other services that you're using APIs with, or that you're allowing to query your own infrastructure. So I don't think we're going away like from using APIs anytime soon. I just think that key management is a very important component, and picking the vendors or services that you have API interactions with is very, very important as well.
Antoine, do you have any examples, without calling the company names, where actual this shadow IT caused a significant problem for the company itself and the end user
Yeah,
or the
I mean, I
employee?
see this every day, not only at a big scale, but also at smaller scales. Like most, I see it very frequently with MSP customers. Like this
Okay.
user downloaded this thing. This thing had a virus in it. It infected their machine, and then it traversed into the directory and then took over the network, like ransomware the network. I've seen other instances where a user signs up to a service uses the same password that they're using somewhere else, and all of a sudden you see password spraying attacks happening on an internet exposed server, and one of the passwords match, and they get compromised. This stuff happens every day, right? A lot of it has to do with users and how they deal with passwords and how they deal with installing software and things like that. And but like if you think at compromises and companies that got compromised over the past couple of years, like Dropbox being one of them in 2012 maybe, or 2013, imagine the number of companies that were using Dropbox without IT knowledge. All of these companies had to deal with something that they didn't have to deal with. Think about Log4j, for example. Log4j had a massive impact on a lot of different service providers. In your company, any employee that was using a service that was vulnerable to Log4j potentially put you at risk. So how do you mitigate against Log4j? You start with the stuff that you are aware of, right? Figure out where you're vulnerable, make sure that there are patches. If there are not patches, turn off the servers or disconnect them from the rest of the infrastructure. But then you need to say, okay, but we might also be exposed through employees that are using things that we currently don't know about today. So I can't give you specific names of organizations because I don't have any in this specific instance, but it's easy to imagine that specific scenario having happened to hundreds of thousands of organizations with Log4j.
When our keynote speaker, Sunil Yu, by the way, I recommend everybody grab his book. It's called Cyber Defense Matrix. Um, and it's a pretty awesome framework structure to kind of give you a way of looking at IT vulnerabilities. And there's this thing that we like to say, there's this left of boom and right of boom. And the boom being when, the day you get hacked is the boom. I think it's a military term, I'm not quite sure, but the left of boom was all the identity protection, make sure you don't get hacked, don't get killed, that type of thing. But then when you do get hit, right, the boom, then you gotta, figure out what happened, pull the plug, stop what's going on, do some forensics, and then recover. All that stuff happens on the right of boom. Um, so I guess I mean, if you were playing in Shadow IT, it's kind of like I don't want to say Russian roulette, but it's in a way that you got to do something to prevent, which I'm assuming to make sure you're not playing with shadow IT apps, right? Um, and then if you do get hit, you got to know where you got hit from. So if you as an IT department you don't know somebody's using application A, B, and C, you might not even know where to look, right? You might go, well, everything we see is locked down. Meanwhile, Antoine is deciding to use WhatsApp to communicate to his friends, and all kind of dating sites and websites that he's not supposed to visit.
Hair care
um,
sites.
exactly. And all of a sudden now he's using the same password as his root access for all these other sites. I mean, just something as simple as that can literally bring down an entire organization. Um, I don't know if there's an answer to that, but using your best guess and knowing what you know, Antoine, how do you tell your employees, cut this out?
I mean, you need to have the right process in place. So you need to use single sign-on with MFA, with a password manager to complement the gaps. You need to use to manage the devices that they're using. You need to have conditional policies in place to make sure that if they try to access things from where they shouldn't, you get alerted or they get blocked. And then once you have all of that in place, you have the required capabilities not only to be able to detect a lot of the instances, but also mitigate a lot of the instances. So once you have that, you have the communication with you start communicating with your employees, and you have like quarterly training and stuff like that, where you talk to them about the risks of using unsanctioned applications, the risks of using compromised credentials, the risks of using putting customer data where it shouldn't be. And that's a great baseline, but then it's a continuous effort. So you detect a new instance of shadow IT, use it as an opportunity to educate the end user. Once you've educated that end user, like there's this certain, like you have to trust that there's benefit to that, right? To some extent. Between that time and the next training, that employee and people around him, people that they're able to influence, aren't gonna use unsanctioned software. There's this layer that you need to have in place. Now, there might still use unsanctioned software or devices. You're going to be able to catch a lot of these instances, and you're hoping that the few instances where they're really making it hard for you to detect are going to be very, very, very minimal. And because you have systems in place to minimize the use of passwords, and when you're using passwords, they're strong passwords, and that you have patched systems and stuff like that, any side effect of shadow IT is going to be minimal. So you can do a lot of this today, and it's very, very, very effective, right? So like a company that has all of these systems in place, the impact radius that they have is very, very small. It should be very, very small. But for a company that does none of that today, it's safe to assume that they're currently exposed, that they're currently compromised, and that they should address the situation ASAP. They shouldn't wait for the data breach to happen, obviously. Like the
It's a good
news
point.
breach to go out.
It's a good point you make there, because you're not going to reduce it completely, but you're going to reduce at least the attack surface, right? And doing something is better than just doing nothing. I would assume that there's no companies out there that's just gone completely rogue, where they tell their employees to use whatever you want to use. Let's hit it out of the park. I think those days are over. I mean, there's some apps, right? And I use TikTok as an example, right? That is used by so many people. And I mean, they're using it on their devices, right? And I'm not quite sure, maybe I'm wrong, um, if TikTok could ever be a sanctioned, um, app. I don't think it is or could be. Um, what do you think of TikTok, Antoine? Do you use it, first of all?
I'm trying to use it actually, because I was against it for a very long time, up until like 6-7 months ago, where I started hearing the benefits that MSPs were getting marketing their services to customers. So I was like, really, TikTok? How does that make any sense? So I downloaded the app and started like scrolling. It's addictive, right? Like that's what it's doing for you now. Is it safe to use? Is it collecting more information than it should? Is it using that information to malicious extent today or in the future? Is it reselling that information? I don't really know. I know there's bad press around it in the West a lot. But if you were to go to another part of the world, I don't know how they look at TikTok today. Now, if it were my organization, would I sanction the use of TikTok? Within the marketing team, yes. But if you're not part of the marketing team, use TikTok on your own device. Why do you need it on a company device?
Well, for the record, I actually deleted my TikTok because I know there's some bad stuff in there. But in general, it is these applications become very popular. Whatever the usage is today changes tomorrow. The privacy policies and stuff is a moving target, and the collection of data is incredible. And I'll just leave it there. That
I
the application is not necessarily going to breach into your company. That's not the purpose of it. The purpose of some application is to learn and to gather data. They have no interest in hacking you as a person, but gathering information can be actually more powerful than actually hacking you, I guess. So there's that challenge. Let's Rob. We've got about 10 minutes left, 12 minutes left on this. Um, Now we've identified that shadow IT is a thing. Rogue apps is a problem, and then the connection of that to APIs is yet another layer of a problem. And having an open conversation is the solution. Um, what's your final thoughts on what you as an MSP now can and should do to open the conversation with your customers about this dilemma?
So you need to get that visibility somehow, right? You can deploy agents, you can look at network layer stuff. Depending on your SaaS system, you need to find a way to get some visibility into shadow IT instances. Once you have that visibility, and it shouldn't be across the board, it could be across a subset like SaaS applications or installed applications on users' devices. You then have a conversation with your client and say, hey, listen, I'm seeing evidence of this. This means shadow IT. Shadow IT can have these negative repercussions. In my opinion, we need to mitigate this because it's a ticking time bomb. It's going to cause problems. And it's not only across this, it can also be across web, the mobile devices, apps, and stuff like that. So we need to get that clear visibility. Can we go ahead and do a thorough discovery effort, install the necessary infrastructure in place to get that visibility and come up with a mitigation plan? And I mean, the conversation has to be yes at some point. You need to find a way for them to say yes, because if not, it's a ticking time bomb. You're gonna suffer negative consequences out of this. Now, assuming they say yes, it's an amazing opportunity for you as an MSP to actually roll out services that you think are core to your customer. If you're not using MFA, that you should use MFA. If you're not using single sign-on, it's a great opportunity to introduce the idea of single sign-on and removing the need for passwords. If there are still applications that can only be accessed with password, it's an amazing opportunity to put in a password manager that's going to give you visibility and control over passwords. If you don't follow zero trust principles, it's also a great opportunity to say, hey, you can further lock down all of this. And you have all of these levers at your disposal, right? So you show the problem to your client, explain the extent of the problem and the repercussions that it has. And as soon as you have buy-in from them to investigate further, you do your thorough research, you come up with a thorough report, and then you show them these opportunities to improve the different services that you can deploy. Now, a lot of customers don't really care about specific applications. They'll just say, how much does it cost? And then it'll be a cost conversation to see how much you can deploy to that customer. But a lot of them will want to know, oh, well, will that mean that it get harder for us to access certain things? Will that mean that John, who left last week with a bunch of company passwords, we won't have this problem again in the future? And you can use that opportunity to answer these questions, make them feel more comfortable about what's gonna happen after you implement the best practices, and then work accordingly. And then you do a monthly or quarterly review. You generate a report, send it to them, have that conversation, say, hey, the number went way down. Seems like a lot of the things that we've done over the past month, quarter, week, whatever, are showing good results. Let's continue pushing. Let's talk about the rest of the stuff you said no to when I proposed like 5 different solutions. Let's improve. Are you open to that idea? And that's it. It's a healthy conversation that can only benefit the end client, right? It comes at a cost, but that cost is nothing compared to a cost of a data breach. And a lot of companies today wait for the after the boom moment that you mentioned to take action. That's how we are. We're reactive people in general. Like our job is to maximize our revenues, reduce our costs as a business, right? Very few companies have a third one, which is improve our security and make sure that we have this insurance layer. Now, this third pillar exists with MSPs. MSPs are all about increasing their revenues, reducing their costs, and improving their security and their security of their customers, because a data breach can have very bad consequences on an MSP. So it's about having that third pillar and trying to get your clients to adopt it as well and say, hey, yeah, the repercussions can be huge. Let's figure out the best way to proceed here. Does that make sense?
Well said, Antoine. It's a very good overview. And a lot of MSPs need to dig into this, obviously, because their job is the first line of defense against cyber attacks for themselves and their customers. They should probably adopt this too in their own company. But it's a great conversation that is necessary to have with your clients, because at the end of the day, I believe that's what's going to, make the difference between you being proactive in a cybersecurity, defense game, or being reactive after you get that boom. And we all know when there's boom, people got to go to the hospital. That's the aftermath. Randall or Neil, who wants to take a little bit of a wrap up from your perspective of what you took away and some
No,
advice?
I'll jump in first, really, because again, I want to just the takeaways of that clear and good communication. Prime example, think about home workers. Having that conversation legitimately with people about other software they may identify they need to know is beneficial to organization. So I think those are the conversations that managers should be focusing upon. Compare that to where I think traditionally managers would have focus of attention, which would be, do I have screen recording software? Have I got a webcam taking their picture of their face every 5 seconds so I know they're at their desk? So they're worrying about them being, slacking off, when in reality, the behavior would indicate to me what most want to do is be more efficient with their time. So change our perspective on the conversations we're having.
And Neil, put on your sales hat for a second. So you've got to go out there, you're an MSP, and you've got to convince a customer that Shadow IT is going to kill them sooner or later. What do you say?
Well, I think the key one is that I would be talking about the fact that we're not saying that these are malicious actions. They're people trying to improve their performance, but what are the implications? So I would just stick with one nice straight around. Data leakage is a great example. What is the reputational damages of data leak? That's the most obvious and easy thing to win on. It's the bit which you're not going to see is all the bloatware they're adding to your processes, which you won't notice for 12 months, 18 months, 2 years down the line. Then suddenly some manager will leave and you'll go, I've lost all of that insight, all of that knowledge, because they've taken that with them because they were using their own platform of subtools and not talking with us. So those would be the two easy wins, I'd say, from a sales perspective.
Add those to the tip box. Randall, what's your final take?
I think there's a deeper lesson here, is that there was a point where everyone was a VAR, and then slowly they became MSPs. I think now most people are MSPs, and they need to be MSSPs. MSSPs. By the way, I'm coining this now. It's going to be MSSP, because
Where are we going with this, Randall?
we need to have MSPs and really, really double down on security. It's the next evolution of our industry, and Shadow IT is just one of those conversations we have to have. There's a few more conversations you have to have. It's a great business opportunity, but more importantly, it's survival of our clients. If our clients get hacked to get out of business, they're no longer a source of revenue. They've had to fire people, good people that are depending on those jobs. It's terrible, and it's really a point where we are now at that crossroads where if you're an MSP and you're not doing security, you're not really having that conversation about Shadow IT, about other MDR, all these other services, you're going to be left behind, because the struggle is real. These things are happening right before our eyes, and it's just going to get more and more and more complicated. Get in the game now.
Well, I feel that Antoine has given me my 50th dose of cybersecurity vaccination about what else we have to worry about. Antoine, what's your wrap-up words? What do you want to say to all the MSPs out there, and why Shadow IT should be one of the things they bring up to their customers? And I know you explained a lot about it, but what's your final wrap-up in a minute?
It's a very common problem. You'll find it in almost every company that you're managing today. It's relatively easy to start detecting, and it's a great conversation starter to get your clients to commit more to security.
Easily said.
I also want to bring up from one of our listeners here, West, talking about switching everything to MFA. He's calling it the seatbelts and bicycle helmets. At first, it's a little bit of annoying, but then you get used to it, and that's how we want our customers to react. It's true. Turning on MFA for some customers is like pulling teeth. It's really difficult, and it's not that difficult when we actually, once you activate it once for Office 365, for example. But it's a hard sell for some people. But we have to have those conversations, and if they don't want to do it, I learned at our conference that we just had that maybe that customer could be a liability to your good reputation. So maybe you shouldn't even be, taking care of them anymore. That's still the point we are, because if one of our customers doesn't do what we tell them to, they get hacked and they drag our name down with them. That's bad news for everybody. So we really have to be aware of these things and protect our customers, protect our clients.
If MSPs don't do it, regulation, compliance, and the insurance company is going to force them to do it. And once you reach that stage, it's pretty much too late because your premiums are going to go up, right? And if you do get hit with that boom thing, if you're playing the right of boom, you're going to have a lot of explaining to do. And, it's very difficult to recover. So
And I
focus on
think
prevention. Yeah,
And
go
I
ahead.
think if you're an MSP and you don't have a service like Jump Cloud or MDR, other security services, when it comes to that time where that client needs it to be compliant, they're going to go somewhere else, and that other company will eventually take over your spot. So it's really where you have to be in the game right now. This is the time. The wave is kind of brewing behind us. The best way to surf is in front of the wave.
There you go. Yeah, what a month it's been, and I don't know who invented October being Cybersecurity Month, but whatever.
October is
We
a scary month, right?
Yeah,
Apparently.
maybe that's it because of Halloween. Yeah, I've been eating some candy a little bit last night, but hey, so here we go. So cybersecurity definitely one of them nuts you got to crack. We're doing our part to help the channel community do it. As a little side note here, we launched our cybersecurity defense ecosystem last week, so that's going to help all the channel partners to move the needle up. And it's our pleasure to bring an interview and have guest speakers like Antoine to talk about another aspect of cybersecurity. This is not the last. There'll be many, many more things we have to double down on in cybersecurity. And shadow IT is real, even though it says shadow. It is real, and I think everybody should double down on this. So, thank you all very much. And by the way, for anyone who want to jump to Jump Cloud, jumpcloud.com, I believe.
Yes, Jump
And
Cloud.
and you also have, by the way, there's a very good blog that you guys wrote on the topic on your website. So we'll add a link to it as well. That you detailed out a lot about the shadow IT in general. So we'll put that link in there as well. All right, folks, back to your world. Thank you for joining us today. And hey, I would say Antoine wins for the best here or the most here, of any guest so far. What do you guys think?
Oh, definitely. Moose hair.
There you go. Right on. You win, man. All right. Take care, everybody. Cheers. I'm going to cheers to everybody on the live stream. Until next time.